Hold your horses. Sit down. In the next few minutes, I'm going to lay out a book that got kicked to the curb by the big shots he 500 years ago. And by the time I'm done, you're going to see exactly why they were shaking in their boots over it. Look, this ain't some wild fairy tale or a crackpot theory I pulled out of thin air. This is cold, hard, buried history. Today we're cracking open the Book of Enoch. It was in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Jesus himself talked about it. His own disciples used it. And then, in 364 AD, the church just cut it out. Why? Keep listening, and you'll figure it out real quick. See, before the modern Bible you've got on your shelf was polished up and sanitized, there was a whole library of real heavy stuff. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church? They're the old guard. They kept 88 of these books, safe and sound. Your local church? They handed you 66 and told you that was enough. They did the homework for you. Big mistake. Today we're diving into the one that scared them the most. We're talking about stuff that makes the history books look like a bedtime story. It was quoted by the big man himself, and it was the blueprint the apostles were working with before the powers that be decided it was too dangerous for you to know. Who was Enoch and why does his book matter? Now, you've probably read the Bible, right? Genesis 5:24? Just 7 words. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. That's it. They give you a blink and you miss it line and expect you to move on. But the Ethiopian records? They've got a whole life story that fills in the gaps. Enoch wasn't just some guy roaming the desert, he was Noah's great-grandfather. He was the first human to get the VIP tour of the heavens. He wasn't just walking with God, he was seeing how the whole damn machine works. He saw the layout of the stars, the gears of judgment, and more importantly, he got the names of the folks who decided to play God down here on Earth. Think about it. Back then, there wasn't a bunch of priests standing between you and the Almighty. Enoch had a direct line. He didn't need a gatekeeper to tell him what was right or wrong, and that's the real reason they buried his book. Once you realize you don't need an institution to talk to the Creator, the guys in the fancy robes lose their leverage, don't they? They couldn't have that. They needed to keep you under their thumb, and a guy like Enoch, he was proof that the thumb didn't need to be there. Now, listen close, because this is where the story stops being a Sunday school lesson and starts looking like something out of a nightmare. Enoch chapter 6, plain as day, tells us about 200 of these angelic beings, the Watchers. These weren't some vague winged spirits like you see on greeting cards. These were powerful, high-ranking entities tasked with looking after the earth. But they went rogue. They descended onto the peak of Mount Hermon, and they made a binding blood oath, a pact. They decided they were sick of watching from the sidelines and wanted a piece of the action. So they took human women as wives, and they didn't just pick any random spots. They went to the top of that mountain and they broke the rules of creation. Their leader? A guy named Samyaza, and he didn't act alone. The text lists 20 of these ringleaders by name. I'm talking about Azazel, Armaros, Barakijal, Kokabiel, Tamiel, Ramiel, Danel, Chazakiel, Barakel, Asael, and so on. You hear those names? Those aren't just fairy tale characters. The Dead Sea Scrolls, the stuff they dug out of the caves in Qumran, the oldest stuff we've got. They confirm this exact list in the Damascus document. This is documented history in the eyes of the people who lived it. These guys weren't playing around. They brought knowledge to humanity that we weren't ready for, and they set off a chain reaction that almost wiped out the species. Think about it. Why would a bunch of heavenly beings want to come down here and mix their blood with ours? It wasn't love. It was a takeover. They were setting up their own little fiefdoms. And poor old Enoch? He was the only one with the guts to write down who they were and exactly what they were doing before the whole world went to hell in a handbasket. Now, if you think things were bad with just the Watchers, wait until you hear about their kids. The Book of Enoch calls them the Nephilim. And let me tell you, these weren't your average neighborhood troublemakers. Enoch chapter 7 verse 2 says these things were 3,000 ells tall. You do the math, that's about 450 feet high. You're talking about skyscrapers walking around on 2 legs. And they were hungry. They consumed everything the humans worked their fingers to the bone to produce. When the grain ran out, they started eyeing the people. When the people were gone, they went after the cattle, the birds, the fish, and when there was nothing left, they started turning on each other. That's why the flood happened. And you need to drop this idea that it was just about sin in the way the local pastor describes it. This wasn't some moral scolding. This was a biological reset. The genetic code of humanity, the stuff that makes you you, was being systematically hijacked. You had entities messing with the building blocks of life, twisting it, forcing it into shapes that were never meant to walk this earth. The planet was essentially turning into an incubator for a hybrid race that wasn't human anymore. It was a cancer, see? And when you've got a cancer that's about to kill the whole body, you don't use a bandage. You perform surgery. The flood wasn't an act of random cruelty. It was a quarantine. It was the only way to purge the genetic infection and start over from a clean line. Noah wasn't just a good guy, he was the last one standing with a clean bloodline. That's the detail they skip in the Sunday school pamphlets. Because once you realize that, you start looking at the history of the world very, very differently. Here is the expanded English version of the final segments, incorporating the old-timer gritty tone and added atmospheric detail to help you reach that 10-11-minute mark with true weight and authority. Now, settle in, because this right here, this is the part that'll absolutely fry your brain if you really let it sink in. Enoch chapter 8 isn't just a list of names, it's a catalog of forbidden stolen patents. These watchers, these beings who descended from the stars, they didn't come here empty-handed. They brought the damn instruction manual for building a civilization, but a civilization built to mirror their image, not ours. Think about it. Azazel, the heavy hitter, he taught men how to forge iron, how to hammer out swords, how to craft heavy armor and shields. He taught humanity the art of slaughter. Before that, people lived, they died, they didn't have the tools to carve up a continent in a week. After Azazel, the earth was stained with blood. But that's just the start. Semjaza taught them enchantments, how to cut roots to make potions, the beginning of occult manipulation. Armaros taught them how to break those very enchantments. Do you see what they were doing? They created the sickness and sold the cure. It was a cycle of dependency that kept humanity begging at their feet. And here is the gotcha moment that makes any honest historian lose sleep. You look at the Sumerians, the Egyptians, the Indus Valley. These civilizations just appear overnight. There's no slow developmental climb, no gradual learning curve. They just jump from mud huts to advanced geometry, complex astronomy, and massive architecture in the blink of an eye. They didn't evolve into it. They were schooled. Barekajal taught them to read the lightning. Kokabiel taught the stars. Tamiel taught the secrets of the moon. They handed humanity the compass, the calendar, and the math of war. What we call the progress of mankind was actually a forced technology transfer from beings who didn't belong on this plane. They gave us the tools to build empires, and then they sat back and watched as we used those very tools to destroy ourselves, all while worshiping them as gods. And now, the million-dollar question. Why, in 364 AD at the Council of Laodicea, did Rome decide this book had to vanish? They didn't ban Enoch because it was fake. They banned it because their system couldn't handle the truth. The Council of Laodicea was the moment the church shifted from being the persecuted to being the persecutors. They wanted absolute power, iron-fisted control, and a rigid hierarchy. The problem for them? The Book of Enoch describes the hierarchy of the fallen angels with brutal, crystalline clarity, a structure of power with rulers, sub-rulers, and assigned domains of control. When you read that, and then you look at the Roman church structure, you realize they were mirroring the very system Enoch warned against. They were building their own Watchers hierarchy. They couldn't let the common people read about how a system of control functions because the people would have looked at the men in the fancy robes and seen the same entities Enoch described. On top of that, Enoch had direct access to the Creator. He didn't need a priest to tell him what God was thinking. That's the ultimate death sentence for any institution that relies on being a gatekeeper. Rome knew. If the common man realizes the connection to the divine is direct and free, the religious empire collapses overnight. So they threw the book into the fire, slapped an apocryphal label on it, and hoarded the keys to the knowledge. But they forgot one thing. In Ethiopia, the people didn't listen. They kept that library pristine for centuries while the rest of the world read whatever the censors permitted. Your Bible is incomplete. There are 14 books missing that show you how the game is actually rigged. The Book of Enoch isn't a secret anymore, but what you choose to do with that information, that's on you. If you want to keep digging behind the curtain of our reality, hit that follow button. Next week, we're going deep into the Book of Jubilees, the other half of this puzzle they've been trying to bury. The picture is getting clearer. Follow along and I'll see you in the next chapter of the history they didn't want you to know.